Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Meet the Atheists segment. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you tonight the Flying Spaghetti Auditor, aka Jed, I believe.
Yes.
Amazing. Yeah, it always does my heart good to meet fellow atheists. We are a rare group of people, and when you see one of your own, you go like, I see you. You are very welcome here. So tell us a little bit about your background. Did you grow up in a religious environment? What was it like, where you find yourself in the world?
Sure. So I was raised as a fundamentalist Christian, a non-denominational Christian, everyone's favorite denomination, a young earth creationist, young earth, creationism, evolution denier, the whole nine yards. So that's how I was raised, and I grew up for, it wasn't until I was about 20 when I became an atheist. So my entire childhood and my early adulthood, I was, raised Christian. I believed it without much question or even much thought until college. Then I really started to dive into and start questioning what it was I was believing, why I was believing these things.
Yeah, that's the funny thing is, it also never occurred to me, for some reason, never occurred to me to ask, why do I believe this? I was always told what to believe, but not why I believe it. It's a very interesting thing that happens when we are exposed to education, especially. So what was that journey of deconversion like for you? People usually, so it goes in one of two directions. People either describe an aha moment where it was like, and the shoe dropped, and other, or it's the complete opposite, where it is a journey of a death by 1,000 cuts, where there's a bird that keeps on pecking at the statue, and eventually the statue is gone. So, what was that process like for you?
Sure. My deconversion happened actually pretty quick, over the course of maybe 1 week. So I guess in relative terms, you could call that the snap of the finger, the aha moment. The thing that really sparked my journey away from Christianity was when I was going to undergrad. One of my friends, we were talking about God and religion, and somebody asked me if I believed in God, and I said, yeah, I believe in God, sure. And then they asked why, which is a good follow-up question. And embarrassingly, I couldn't come up with anything good. I just said, well, I guess this is just what I believe is true. It was what I was taught to believe growing up, and I felt kind of embarrassed by my answer, because just believing something because somebody told you it's true is a horrible reason to believe anything. So I did what any rational person would do and start searching for an explanation, searching for a reason to believe in God. So I started down the rabbit hole on YouTube, watching debates, atheists versus Christian, atheists versus Muslims, or just atheists speaking. And I started making a list of all these different questions and thoughts I had about Christianity, just a small list on like a piece of paper. And maybe like 5 or 6 bullet points was all it really took for me to say, you know what, this whole religion doesn't really make any sense. And no one who is advocating on behalf of Christianity can present anything compelling to believe in it. All their arguments and all their evidence are fallacious. They're all full of holes. They're all flawed, special pleading. So once I realized that, I didn't have any good reason to believe what I believed. So I, did what the only intellectually honest thing to do was, which is just, admit that I no longer was convinced in a God. I couldn't be convinced in a God.
Yeah, it's interesting how that process works. From my personal experience as well. When I first learned about the flaws in our thinking, the logical fallacies, I could go through every single one of them and identify some aspect of religion that had fallacious thinking in it. It's crazy how that works. And the thing is, we are so primed to buy the lie that And I think it comes from so many different factors as well. You know, it's from our society, from people that we trust in our immediate family, that you know that imprint these beliefs on us. So it was very jarring for me that experience at first, to see like, wait a minute, this is not something's not right here. This isn't checking out. And I mean, it takes a lot of courage actually to do this, because a lot of people will rather toe the line. They'll rather toe the line than actually say, wait a minute, there's something a bit fishy here.
Yeah. And religion it's such an ingrained part of people's personalities. So people love their religion so much that it becomes a fundamental aspect of who they are. So when they are challenged in their beliefs, not only do they feel it as a personal attack, like if I say, I get this all the time online when I post a video, I'll make some objection to something in the Bible, and then Christians are like, why are you always attacking us? And I'm like, I have never attacked Christians. I only attack the theology. I attack the dogma. But they view it as a part of themselves that they can't let go of. And it's hard for them to start questioning because they view it as such a personal thing. So to start deconstructing their religion means to basically find a new identity for themselves.
Right. And it's very interesting that you mentioned that word identity. It's because very often you'll find that people, the religion is incorporated as a part of people's identity. They will think of themselves in terms of, I am a Christian named John. They won't say, I am John and I happen to be a Christian, you know. So it's very strange how that works. So when you finally end up criticizing or even pointing to flaws in the religious doctrine, people take it as a personal affront. It's crazy how that works. So was there a specific person or an organization you mentioned that you ran across some debates online, which was also a big one for me? You know, I can only think of great minds, you know, the giants on whose shoulders we stand. But was there any person or organization that was influential in your deconversion?
Oh, tons of them, sure. Hemant Mehta, who you probably know on YouTube as the Friendly Atheist, his was the very first video that sent me down the atheist rabbit hole. And I honestly, at the time, I wasn't even, I didn't really have religion on my mind. I was browsing YouTube when I saw this video thumbnail that said, 7 things to never say to an atheist. And I thought, oh, that might be interesting. So I just clicked on it, just to see what it's all about. And then, I see this guy, Hemant Mehta, speaking about, don't tell us that we're going to be tortured forever in hell, that sort of thing. And, it just got the ball rolling when I started watching more of his videos. I also started watching Matt Dillahunty on the Atheist Experience. And since then, he's moved over to The Line. Then, of course, you got your really heavy hitters, your Hitchens, Richard Dawkins. So I would just watch as many debates as I could between them and, your heavy hitters from the Christian side, William Lane Craig, Frank Turek, Ray Comfort, Kent Hovind. You see all these apologists versus all these atheists. And what I tended to see in every single debate was that the Christian was making a bunch of claims that he couldn't back up, and the atheist was just pointing out why those claims were flawed and why the evidence wasn't good enough. And so it's like, obviously when you watch the debate, if you have an open mind, the answer is clear. I think so many Christians are biased because they wish it was true. They're looking for a reason to believe. They're not looking for the actual truth. I always try to end my videos, longer form videos, by saying the truth has nothing to fear from investigation. So if you know the truth, there's nothing to, there's no reason to be scared from questioning these beliefs and questioning what you've been told.
Right. The truth does not fear the light. It's only lies that fear the light, that hide in darkness. It's such a true thing that you're saying.
Yeah.
So, I love this whole concept of the flying spaghetti monster. The way I love it. I love it. It's, and it's so, it's such a, punch on the nose, because the whole Christian religion, you can parody exactly every single thing of it and base it on whatever mythical character you want, and it works. It jives. There's absolutely no. There's you can make up a noodly appendage that stretches from Earth to Uranus, and nobody can tell you that you're wrong. But what other kind of activism are you are you involved in? Mostly online. How do you go about this? Because I always find that as soon as people there's a certain kind of person in this world, right, that whenever they learn something new or they discover a truth or something, they want to share it. They want to share it. It can come from different motivations. It can come from altruistic, humanist motivations, where it's your sincere attempt to prevent your fellow creature from stepping in the same landmines as you have, to various different motives. What kind of activism are you currently engaged in?
Mine is almost entirely online. So, despite what some Christians in the comment section might think, in my everyday life, I'm not running around telling people that God's not real and you should stop believing in Jesus and look at all these contradictions in the Bible. I'm almost entirely like, I very rarely talk about religion in my job, in my day-to-day life, except for those people who I know are like-minded or open to those conversations. So I don't go around proselytizing for atheism. I don't go around shoving my beliefs down people's throats. I'm not knocking on doors. And not that there's anything wrong with atheist activism. I've been to a couple of conventions. I checked out the Matt Dillahunty and Seth Andrews were here in Phoenix a couple of years ago, so I went to their convention and listened to them speak. So it's cool to go to stuff in person and see a whole bunch of like-minded people, but I'm not in the business of trying to recruit people for atheism in real life. I prefer the internet because the conversation is open for those people that want it. And so if anyone is interested in this kind of topic, the algorithm's going to give them this sort of video. And then if they find it interesting, they'll watch. If they don't find it interesting or they don't want to talk about it, they can just ignore it. And there's nothing, well, I wouldn't say there's nothing wrong with ignoring it, because I think everyone should try to question their own beliefs. But I certainly don't think that anyone should be forced into a conversation that they don't want to have.
Exactly. But, I think that the issue is that we have a romanticized idea of activism in the Western world. When we hear the word activist, we picture, hippies chained up to a whaling boat with Greenpeace signs, or people standing in front of a bulldozer in the Amazon forest. And that is this romanticized idea that we have about activism, where activism can be as simple as simply putting your foot down and drawing a line in the sand and saying, this is not flying here. Take your 6,000 years ago, God said poof with Mudman and Ribwoman, and that goes over there with the Kraken and Zeus and Odin, and the science and the reality goes over here. It's not the same thing. So, but it's funny that you say, because I look at the channel that you have, and I just I consider that the best form of activism, because ultimately it's a battle of changing people's minds. And like we spoke about before we went live, it's just that effort to destigmatize this idea that people have in their minds of these people who have orgies in the forests while they're roasting babies and praying to Satan, and the thing is,
that actually sounds like a good time to me.
It sounds like a good time, I know. But I ramble. You're 100% on the same page.
One thing that's kind of interesting before we go on from that, activism, I think I'm all for the freedom of religion. I think people should be absolutely free to believe whatever nonsense that they make up and want to believe about the universe. Reincarnation, or the gods made the sky and the mud man, or whatever it is that you want to make believe. That's totally fine. But I think that activism becomes not only warranted, but necessary when those people start to shove those beliefs down our throats and start demanding that we believe the same thing, that our kids are supposed to be taught religion in schools. The 10 Commandments need to be posted up on the walls and in public school classrooms. What else? Creationism needs to be taught in schools. Evolution can't be taught, or that women shouldn't be allowed reproductive freedom because God doesn't like it. As soon as someone starts trying to shove their religion down my throat, that's when I'm going to put my foot down and say, you know what? I don't believe in your nonsense, God. You don't have any reason to think it's true. As soon as you can demonstrate that it's real, maybe then we can start about the implications. But even if your God was real, I wouldn't even really care. I think women should still get freedom. I think, LGBT people should still have freedom regardless of whatever some man in the sky says or wants. Why should, even if he's real, why should we, care about what he thinks or wants from us? As soon as you can demonstrate that his desires have some sort of effect on us, or that we have some sort of way of knowing what his desires are, then, I have no interest in hearing about this God or having it shoved down my throat.
Exactly. And that the thing is that Christians especially see silence as acquiescence, and that is where the big problem lies. If you do not put your foot down, they immediately assume that you are on board with whatever they're imposing on you. And it's very strange how the will of God always aligns with the will of the people speaking on behalf of the God. It's very, very, very funny how that works. So,
and isn't it convenient that God always speaks through human representatives? He never, ever speaks for himself.
But this is also what I don't get. It's almost like the God of the classic, what do you call the original flavor God, right? The one in the Old Testament, before like hippie Jesus and all of that in the New Testament. But that God was like here, he was there. He was like, there was like, he was parting seas, and it's like making food materialize from the sky and shit. He was like really hands on. He was hands on. He was getting shit done, And nowadays, it's almost like he's retired. It's like retired, or he's like that uncle in prison that everybody knows about but nobody talks about for some reason. It's weird.
The frequency of miracles drastically drops as our ability to investigate and report on them increases. So as soon as video cameras were invented, miracles just stopped. Unless you ask the Catholic Church, they're the only people who say, "Oh yeah, look at all these documented miracles, and this guy was resurrected, and this bread turned mushy bread or something," and it's like, okay, well, show me a scientific paper for that before I believe it.
There was at some stage people were counting the number of nails, like real nails from the cross on Gethsemane that the Catholic Church has, and there were probably a couple of hundred of them, and the math doesn't check out on that. There should only be like at most 3.
Right, no kidding. And there were also they were selling splinters of wood from the cross for a long time too. The church was like, it's only $300, and you can get this, this little piece of wood that was on the cross. And first of all, even if Jesus really died on that cross, why would you even want that? It's like buying the bullet that shot JFK. If you like it,
I would think that the very last thing that Jesus would want to see when he comes back is a cross. And
yeah, no kidding.
And yet, it's it's a very weird kink. It's almost like I've called it this before. I'll call it this until somebody changed my mind. But it's torture porn.
Yeah.
It's a fetish. It really is a sick fetish, because these people celebrate an assassination of somebody in and then it's ghastly, man. It just turns me cold. I don't know why.
It is actually really gross. Yeah, when you think about it. Not only that, but it's one thing to just see a wooden cross. On that one, it's more of a symbolic grotesqueness. But with other denominations, especially Catholicism, you'll see these crucifixes with a dead corpse of bloody Jesus with blood rolling all down his body, and it's like a really gross looking image. And it's like, you really want that painting on your wall of a dead corpse? Like, it's so weird.
I spoke to another atheist a while ago, and she was telling me as well, like as a child, how because she was raised Catholic, but she said this image of, she never wanted to go to church purely because of this image of the bloody corpse of Jesus was right there behind the priest, and she said it gave her nightmares, and she used to cry. And the mother used to spank her and say, like, fuck, you're going to church. It's crazy.
Wow.
But it's a traumatic experience, like, which moves me onto a different track here. People always say, what harm does it do? You atheists are always so, just leave the Christians be, leave them. They're not harming you. They're just going to church. But there's a lot of negative impact that religion has on society. I mean, like we've mentioned a few of them, but for me, the thing that sticks with me to this day, like almost a decade and a half later, is just the way that it programmed me in a specific way to think of myself as less than, I was just thinking to myself, if I didn't have this baggage that I was holding on to, where religion keeps on telling me that I'm worthless, that I'm unworthy of being loved, that I will never, unless I embrace the glory of God, I will never amount to anything. I'll just be fodder for the fires of hell. And it imprints you on a negative way in your psyche, and I consider that is the biggest harm. I mean, like half the population, it tells women that they are second-class citizens, to men. And what is your thoughts? What are your thoughts on some of the harmful impacts that negative impacts that religion has on people? We constantly hear reports of people saying they were constantly living in fear, feeling that they were being supervised, unrealistic expectations of behavior, purity, all of this, intolerance towards others. If people weren't of the Christian faith, they were evil, and you should shun them and keep them away from you. I'm very curious to hear, what it was like there where you live.
Sure. So one of the biggest ones, I think, one of the biggest negative impacts that religion has is it strips people of their ability to deal with death in a healthy way. So you go to almost any funeral here in the United States, at least, and it's almost like a church service. And the whole thing is like, it's not a celebration of life. It's not, mourning the loss of somebody. The whole thing is just a circle jerk of people telling each other, oh, we're going to get to see this person again. Don't worry, it's only a few years, and then we'll be reunited.
They're in a better place. In a better place now. They in heaven playing harps for Jesus.
Or oh, the person is here with us right now. He's watching his own funeral, and it's like the whole thing is, instead of dealing with death in a way that makes sense, it's denying the whole thing even existing. Because people hate the fact that humans are mortal. They're scared of their existence coming to an end. And admittedly, nobody wants to die. I don't want to die. So instead of embracing that fact and accepting it, people would rather make up a lie and tell it to each other to reinforce it. Oh, we're going to live forever. Even atheists, people that don't believe in your God, are going to live forever, except instead of going to paradise, we just get tortured forever in hell. So stripping people of their ability to deal with death in a healthy way, I think, is one of the biggest negative impacts with religion. And then, of course, some of the other ones you mentioned, I'll pair it. Promoting bigotry towards LGBT people. Thankfully, being LGBT is becoming more and more acceptable nowadays. But rewind the clock 50 years, and that certainly wasn't the case. Gay people were killed and tortured, or they had to live in denial their entire life for fear of being massacred by Christians and Muslims alike. And by Muslims, that's definitely still happening in the Middle East. They're still killing gay people left and right. Then, of course, there's also just the us versus them mentality that it creates. Oh, we're the good guys because we have God. Everyone else is a Satan worshiper. Those atheists, they worship the devil. Like you said, they eat babies in the forest and they sacrifice babies and I don't know, whatever they think that we do for fun. Maybe I enjoy my fair share of a baby sacrifice now and again, but that's beside the point.
Yeah, as a side note, you did get the invite to the baby barbecue tomorrow, didn't you?
Oh, perfect, excellent. Yeah, I did. I did.
We're gonna have it on Zoom for those who those who are not in the country. But yeah,
I'll bring
got good. Don't miss it.
Then not only that, I think that religion also strips people of their sense of morality. It degrades their morality because, I'll point out something objectionable in the Bible, like how the Bible promotes slavery, which is really unavoidable. If you read Leviticus 25, 44 through 46 and Exodus 21, it's very clear that the God of the Bible promotes lifelong chattel slavery where you can be your slave and make it.
Big fan. He's a big fan of the practice.
And then Christians, rather than saying the rational thing, which is, I'm not sure why that's in the Bible. I disagree with it, and the God I worship would never condone that. Obviously, the Bible's been corrupted. Rather than saying that, they double down and either deny what it says by lying and saying, oh, it's just indentured servitude. They're paying off a debt, and then they can go free whenever they want. It's the same as modern day employment. Or they go the worst route, which is to say, oh, slavery is actually okay, or it was okay back then, and then God changed his mind. And then, of course, I think my favorite objection to the Bible is the slaughter of babies. God himself kills millions of babies. He orders the slaughter of at least thousands of babies on multiple occasions. And then when I bring that one is very undeniable. God says, kill everything that breathes. Do not leave anything alive. That's Deuteronomy 20:16. So when I point that out, Christians will just say, oh, those babies, it's totally fine for God to kill them because they went straight to heaven. They were going to live a life. If you let them grow up, then they would be raised by evil people. And so it's like, okay, so you're saying it's okay to kill a baby if their parents did something wrong because they might have a bad life in the future. Or God is really smart, so it's okay if he kills babies. Or God brought us into this world, therefore it's okay if he takes us out. All these horrible excuses for the most atrocious behavior you could even imagine, which is just slitting a baby's throat for no good reason. And Christians embrace all of it. And that's, I think, one of the worst things about the religion. It destroys people's sense of morality, which is also ironic because the same Christians will accuse you and me of not having any foundation for our morality. And then I point out that mine is well-being. And then, of course, they say, well, that's just arbitrary. What if I don't care about well-being?
That's a subjective sense of morality. Like what happens tomorrow when you change your mind? Are you still moral?
And I always like to just throw it right back at them. Like, what happens when God changes his mind tomorrow? Because it used to be okay to own slaves, and now it's not. And God changes his mind. It's bad to eat shrimp, and then now it's okay because he's changed his covenants. That kind of brings me a sneak peek at a video idea I have in the works. Is that we had an old covenant, and now we're in the new covenant. So when Jesus returns, what if there's another new covenant where he changes the rules again? Or now maybe being gay is totally okay. Maybe veganism is mandatory. All these changes to just go along with the changes to our own culture. Because as you know, morality, our sense of morality does change over time because ultimately it is kind of subjective. And then in order to stay with the times, Christians have made up this post hoc rationalization, new covenant nonsense where God changed his mind because, he needed to guide people slowly. He couldn't just ban slavery outright. He needed to hold our hand and say, okay, you can have slaves, but just, don't kill them, just beat them so hard they can't walk and make sure they can walk in a day or two. It's just bizarre. The tap dancing things were unending.
That's it. That's it. You stole the words from my mouth. It's like I call it tap dancing for Jesus. That's all.
Yeah.
That's the favorite pastime of these apologist types. They'll take the truth and they will massage it they'll put it on a massage bed, and it will just be, like, let me work that out for you over here. How's that knot in your neck? It's crazy. And the thing is, they will twist themselves into pretzels trying to make the book line up with modern day sensibilities, where it's just, I don't know. I always insist on a literal reading of the text firstly. Then you can try and massage it however you want to. But first, we have to agree that's what a literal reading of the text says. And they have to admit it. I will not proceed with any discussion beyond the point where you admit this is literally what it says. Then we can hear about the tap dancing and the massaging and all of that. But it's very important that Christians need to have their feet held to the fire, because they're very, very selective about because that book can be, you can take that book and find a passage in there somewhere that will justify just about anything. I always liken it to dropping a fancy piece of jewelry, like that you really treasure, dropping that piece of jewelry in a pile of poop. You know that it's in there, but do you actually want to go digging for it? That's the real question.
That's a good one.
And trust me, they'll Christians will work from A to Z through the whole pile of poop to try and find something that they can make gel with it. It's crazy, But the
What's interesting.
Yeah, but the
I
question.
was going to point out that it's interesting how every single Christian, despite claiming that God wrote His morality on our hearts, they all have a different version of their own morality. So even amongst Christians, it's subjective. I know Christians who are pro-life. I know Christians who are pro-choice. I know Christians who think that it's wrong to eat shrimp and that God's going to get really mad if you do. And then I know Christians that think that's rubbish and hogwash. Take any moral issue and you'll find good-hearted, well-meaning, Bible-believing Christians on both sides of the aisle. So clearly God hasn't written anything on our hearts, because nobody can agree on anything.
Right. For me, the clear indication that morality is subjective is that it differs from location to location. The morality that you find in a village in Kenya is 180 degrees from the morality that you'll find in a city in Europe or a city in North America, and that is an indication. It's like that line when Darwin said the stamp of our lowly origins or something, and that is the indelible stamp of the origin of our morality, is just the fact that it differs. Because if it came from an objective source, it would be universal. Everybody would have the same morals if it came from God. But no, it's because Satan is sitting on your left shoulder, whispering into your ear, corrupting you, and it's the sweet voice of the devil that's corrupting your morals. Well, then I don't know. It's all a bunch of malarkey. Like it's like a fairy tale that we still cling to it. And the question that I wanted to ask before I went on this rant is, when do we actually grow out of it? When there has to be a critical mass, like we are going to reach that point where there's a critical mass of people that disregard these religious fables completely. And when we reach that critical mass, that's when it will start to decline, and it will become just another Zeus and Athena and Quetzalcoatl in the evolution of our species. It's a strange idea.
The pessimistic side of me thinks that religion's never going to go away. There's always going to be people with, wild beliefs that they can't reconcile, they can't justify, because, throughout all of recorded human history, there has been religion. So And that doesn't necessarily mean that it will be here forever. And hopefully I'm wrong and that someday it's eradicated, not through force, but through reason and argumentation by people realizing they don't have any good reasons to believe this stuff. And never through force, because that's the theistic approach, which is making people believe in your God, believe in my God or else I'll kill you. That's how the Christians promoted their belief throughout most of the Middle Ages. That's how a lot of Muslims have promoted their belief, even in more recent times. It's barbarism. It's horrible. And I wish that we as a species could move past it and start to see the world for how beautiful it really is, because I think that religion cheapens reality. If you look up at a beautiful sunset, you'll see, or you'll hear Christians saying, "Oh, isn't it beautiful? It's like God painted the sky." But it's like, if God painted it,
Oh, God is good. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Look how beautiful the sky is.
To me, it's nature and is so much more beautiful and so much more awe-inspiring without a magical puppet master that's controlling everything.
Right.
If you have a magical man who just, it's like he painted the sky, or it's like he just put clip art up into the sky and we're looking at a fake image. It's like, isn't it more beautiful that that's just the way that the world is, through its own natural rules? I think evolution is actually beautiful too. The fact that every living thing is related, we're all connected to each other, we're all part of the same family. You and me, we're cousins, not only with each other, but with bananas and mushrooms, and everything is related. I think that's awesome and so cool. But people want to take that concept and twist it, and they're like, "Oh, it's so horrible." If evolution is
from no monkey, I didn't come from no monkey. You don't have a cousin with a banana,
I've heard Christians say, "Oh, the implications of evolution is that humans are nothing more than rats or pond scum. We're just worthless because we have origins in these lowly, low life, no intelligence. We're just nothing but rats." And I think, well, is Christianity really that better when we're taught that we're nothing more than dirt? Like, wouldn't you rather be from a monkey than a pile of dirt? I think monkeys are cooler, but
it resonates with me what you say. Like, I always think it is, you cannot, if you leave the city and you just go stand somewhere in the country and you look up at the night sky like this here behind me, and you just see that and you experience that emptiness, and you realize with all the knowledge that you've acquired on this planet that we are interconnected with every single animal on this planet. It's such a profound realization. Dare I say, spiritual on a certain level, but it's a profound realization to realize that you are not elected, but rather that you, are just part of a mosaic, and you're a very significant part of the mosaic. I mean, humans, we form like a whole color on the mosaic. But that to me is profound. And then, to come and, say, no, why do you go on this search for knowledge? Like, fuck knowledge, like, here we come with this book. It's got all the answers in it, and it's crazy. It's crazy to me. That cheapens and dismisses this whole endeavor that we have as the human species of acquiring knowledge, of improving our surroundings. And yes, we are clumsy and we are still at the infancy of our journey. But that is a noble pursuit, thinking, what's that saying that says, religion thinks that it has all the answers, whereas science is the complete opposite, where it's better. No, here it is. It's better to have questions that religion says they give you questions that cannot, answers that cannot be questions, as opposed to questions that cannot be answered. And that's it in a nutshell. It's we spoke about this earlier as well, where we are deeply uncomfortable with uncertainty. And it's an evolutionary byproduct. I always say this. The people who survived living on the savannah in the grasslands were the people who thought that rustling in the grass, that wind rustling in the grass, is a lion, and they ran. Those are the people who survived. You know, the people who didn't think that it was a lion, they were the people that got eaten. You know, they didn't get to propagate their genes. And that is what we're left with today. We are left with a deeply superstitious, deeply pattern-seeking and pattern-recognizing kind of animal. And it just makes perfect sense, you know, like when you think about it in those terms. I don't know if you agree. But
yeah. Yeah, you know, people want to see agency. They assume agency even when there's not. Like the lion in the grass, people would rather believe there's someone causing a phenomenon in nature that is completely natural. And that's the God of the gaps argument. You'll see, you know, if you ask someone why they believe in God, a very common one is, well, I have no idea how the universe got started. Therefore, a magical man in the sky said poof, and then abracadabra, here's the universe. It's a closer. It's a way for them to shut down investigation, because, like you said, once you assume that God did it, you're not going to go out and look for the reason why, because you just assume that you already have it. And these gaps where we stick God, you know, the origin of the universe and abiogenesis are really the only two big ones left. Yeah. These gaps in our knowledge, every time they get filled, they're filled with something that's not God. People used to think Zeus was chucking lightning bolts down on Earth, and then we discovered lightning bolts, and now we know that it's not Zeus. In fact, it is completely natural. And so there's every time that we fill a gap, it's been natural. So there's no reason to assume that, oh, maybe one of these gaps will get filled by God. All it is an argument from personal incredulity or an argument from ignorance fallacy. I don't know how X happened, therefore God did it. And it's just a horrible way to justify anything, because I could just make up any explanation and assume that mine is right because you don't have an answer.
Right. No, 100%. So, you know, they always say that hindsight is 20/20, I believe the saying goes. So, you know, when you look back now, you know, with all the experience and knowledge that you have, what advice would you give to young Jed? Looking back, you know, a lot of people, you know, just to spark, to grease the wheels, so to say. You know, you know, I wish I could say to myself, like, don't trust people in authority. People in authority do not have your best interest at heart. They have their own best interest at heart. You know, but what's one life lesson that you would impart to young Jed?
Honestly, when it comes to religion, I don't know as if I would, you know, change, you know, anything about my deconversion or my experience, or even try to push it earlier. I'm happy with the way that it happened. I thought that I went about looking for evidence in a healthy way, came across good conclusions at a reasonable time in my life when I was, you know, still a young adult. You know, I guess I'm still a young adult now. I'm only 29.
You know, as soon as I asked the question, I was saying to myself, like, what an incredibly stupid question. This man is like still in his 20s. I'm sitting here resentful and bitter that I wasted like 3-4 decades of my life on this nonsense.
Well, I don't feel as though I really wasted. Thankfully, I didn't waste that much time with religion. Most of my memories, especially when I was a young kid, were actually pretty pleasant. My family and I went to a pretty big church that was, I mean, at the time, I didn't recognize it as being either too conservative or too liberal. It just felt like church. You know, most of what we talked about was love, compassion, and then the pastors and priests would try to promote treating each other well and being good and faithful to your spouse, you know, all this stuff that I agree with.
Oops, you froze up for me there. Yeah. There we go. Let me just drop you out there.
There we go.
Yeah.
But Christians always assume that whenever someone deconverts from their religion, it's because something horrible happened to them. I'll see comments, I'll make a video about how slavery is immoral, and then someone writes in the comments, I'm so sorry that somebody in the church hurt you. You know, just so you know, this isn't Jesus' fault. Yeah. I hope you find God again. And it's like, no one in a church, you know, touched me in an inappropriate way. I didn't have any of these, you know, stereotypical negative experiences. While those are valid, a lot of people suffer at church. Yeah. There's a lot of churches that are horrible. Thankfully, my experience wasn't like that. My deconversion was entirely based on theology, science, and philosophy. There was never any emotional baggage associated with it. Never any bad experiences besides, being told that I deserve to be tortured forever. But that was never really somebody yelling at me like I'm worthless and you deserve to be hell. It was, that's more of the implication I get from the Bible itself, not from the people in my life.
Yeah, it comes in many different flavors. That ice cream we call religion, it's served in many different flavors. Some people get an ice cream sandwich, other people get a runny cone on a hot day. Did you see a significant shift in your worldview? A lot of our members also report that they've become more tolerant. First, that's the biggest theme of people who deconvert, because personally, I think religion, especially Christianity, is a religion of intolerance. It teaches people to separate themselves, like separate the sheep from the wolves, as they say. Have you found any significant shifts in your worldview, reworking of moral frameworks? And how did you navigate that process of establishing your beliefs post-religion?
A lot of the shift in my personal worldview actually happened prior to my deconversion. So when I was, maybe like 18, 19, 20, when I was, first starting off my college career, I was exposed to a lot of different ideas and different people. And so growing up, I always was under the impression that being gay was really evil and bad, and gay people are horrible and gross. And then when I went to college and interacted with actual people in the LGBT community, I realized these people aren't horrible. There's nothing that they're not even different than me. They just are attracted to different people than I am, and there's nothing wrong with that. So I think for me, it was recognizing that some of the prejudices I had, like against gay people, were unfounded and unwarranted. That happened first before I even left Christianity. And in fact, the shift in my worldview may have even impacted my deconversion, because, once I started, accepting that there's nothing wrong with being gay, then a closer examination of, say, like Leviticus 20:13, where it says gay men deserve to be executed and their blood is on their own heads. It's kind of a grotesque thought. It's like, these people aren't evil. They don't deserve to die any more than anyone else who has sex. Which is, I don't think anyone who has consensual sex deserves to die. So that was a big thing for me. And once I left the religion, people would say, and a big part of these conversations that is involved with the theology is, what's the foundation for your morality? And that kind of question has only ever been asked me after I left Christianity. So when I was a Christian, no one ever wanted to know what my basis for my morality was. I don't think I was even ever asked that question and had to ponder it. And by the first time I was ever asked that, I was already equipped with pretty good answers. I borrow my foundation from something that Matt Dillahunty has said a number of occasions, which is well-being. I think that actions are moral when they enhance happiness, health, and well-being, and they're immoral when they promote or cause unnecessary harm and suffering. And it's such a simple philosophy to live by. If you're causing unnecessary harm, then don't do that. If you're creating or enhancing well-being, then go ahead and do it. Or if there's no effect, then it's an amoral activity. And then Christians always say, that foundation isn't good enough. Like we talked about earlier, it's arbitrary. And hear Christians ask, why should I care about well-being? What if I just am okay with suffering? And it's like, really? You're okay with suffering and you see nothing wrong with babies having their throat cut and all this stuff? And, it's very much hypocrisy, because Christians pretend like they don't care about well-being in order to win these arguments, or to have points in these arguments, even though deep down they do care about well-being. They don't want to see other people suffer. Exactly. They like suffering for the sake of argument.
Yeah. And this whole notion of, God being the objective source of morality, that motherfucker changed his mind like this throughout the Bible. Wakes up in the morning, and then this flies, and then at night it doesn't fly anymore, you know. So, you know, like I don't know, you know, like it sounds kind of sus to me. I don't know.
And not only that, but he can be persuaded by humans. You probably know the story. I think it's Genesis 18, I think, when God and Abraham are having a chat in person, by the way, so Abraham could see God's face. And God was like, you know, I think I'm just going to commit genocide on this whole city over here. I'm just going to kill them all. Babies, women, pregnant women, everyone. And then Abraham was like, well, what if there were like 40 good people in the city? Would you still kill it? I sure you would, because you're such a good God. And God's like, okay, 40, I won't kill him if you can find 40 good people. And then Abraham's like, what about 30 good people? And then they haggle back and forth like that until Abraham whittles God all the way down to 10 righteous people. If the city just has 10, then he won't kill everyone. And the implication, of course, being if the city only has 9 good people, then God is still going to commit a total genocide. There has to be at least 10 good people. And none of that makes any sense because A, why is God being influenced by one guy? And B, why can't God just individually kill the people who are evil in that city? Why do we need to wipe out the whole thing? You know, the babies, the unborn babies, they didn't do anything wrong to being genocided. Not only that, but the infrastructure and the buildings. You know, why does God have to tear all that down just because a few people in the city are weirdo rapists? You know, it's just like, just kill the people that deserve it and not everyone. Same with the flood or any other genocide.
But here's the question, right? Wouldn't an omniscient God know these things?
You would think so.
Right.
You know, it's weird how this idea of omniscience seems to contradict the feeling of regret. As you know, God also feels regret.
It's impossible to feel regret if you're omniscient.
Right, exactly. You know, I think it's Genesis chapter 6 where God
regrets
himself,
making man. Yeah.
Regrets making humans. He's like, oh, what was I thinking with these humans? They're so immoral. I shouldn't have made them. And it's like, well, you're the one that programmed our brains, so it's ultimately all his fault. And then the flood story is another great example where God could have spared all the innocent babies and only killed the evil people, but he decided to kill not only all humans, but all animals. Billions and billions of innocent animals all drowned because God couldn't think of a better way to eradicate sin from the world, which was ultimately a huge failure because as soon as the boat landed, there was sin in the world. Noah started becoming a drunk. He started binge drinking, and he was a nudist, which, granted, I don't think there's anything wrong with, but God is very, very anti-nudism. So God's whole plan failed, and he couldn't see that from the start. He's a bumbling buffoon, at least in the Old Testament.
But that's the thing as well, is like if you are omniscient, you wouldn't need to have like a complete do-over. You know, because
Right.
that's essentially what the flood was. It's like it's a do-over. You know, he was like, well, fuck this shit. You know, I need to like clear the board and start from scratch. You know,
and not only that, it was pretty close to the beginning of the universe. I think it was only 1,000 years or so after God made the whole world. It's like, it's already gone to shit. I've got to start completely from scratch.
Oh, that's whack.
There's also a lot of incest involved with the flood story too, because of course Noah's kids all have to have sex with their cousins in order to repopulate the earth, and then you go back to Adam and Eve where there's more incest between siblings. Then later on, God changes his mind and says incest is bad, brothers and sisters, you can't be doing it with each other, even though he fabricated a situation to force brothers and sisters to have sex with each other. They had no other option. Cain had to have sex with his sister or his mom in order to repopulate the world.
You sound very knowledgeable to me on the Bible, you know, like the way that you just rattle it off. You know, like I always have this question about, you know, during, have you ever heard of the land of Nod?
Yes.
Right.
So super familiar with it, but it rings a bell.
Yeah, so those were where you know, after, I think it's after where there was only supposed to, I can't remember if it is just as they came out of the garden or as they came, off the flood, but there's only supposed to be like this one select family available, and then all of a sudden there's this mention of this land where other people are living, and this is very, very intriguing to me. I was just wondering, like, where did they come from? Like, were they
other people? Actually, I have heard two different Christian responses to this issue with the Bible. One of them is that Cain was living with his parents while they were having a bunch of other kids. And then all these other kids moved out of the house and formed their own town. And then Cain decided, you know what, I think I'm going to move over here too. And so he just moved from mom and dad's house over to the next city where all of his siblings had been living for the last couple of years, which doesn't really make any sense to me. If there's only half a dozen people on the planet and you're all family, why would you want to move away from your parents? Wouldn't you want to stick together and enhance your chance of survival? But the other, much more interesting excuse I've heard for this is that God made those other people independent of Adam and Eve. So God made Adam in the garden, and then God also made, without the Bible ever mentioning it specifically, God made all these other people in the land of.
Yeah, so God was playing the field. He wasn't putting all his eggs in one basket with Adam and Eve. Like he was saying, like, there's a backup plan. In Nod.
The interesting thing about that is that all these people in Nod don't have the knowledge of good and evil because they are not the descendants of Adam and Eve because they never ate the fruit. Because as you know, the knowledge about morality is you can pass it on to your children by eating magical fruit. So that didn't happen with any of the people in Nod. So how do they know right from wrong? They can't, which means that God is unjustified in his expectations that they are living sin-free. And so when he flooded the world to kill everyone, it was a horrible thing to do because he's punishing people that didn't know any better because they didn't know right from wrong unless they were direct descendants of Adam and Eve.
Right. I don't know. It sounds like a setup to me. It sounds like a big setup.
Yeah, the whole Garden of Eden story, it's all a setup. God certainly did not even need to make the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but he made it anyway. He didn't need to put it in the center of the garden, but he did anyway. And he didn't need to make a talking snake and put it in the tree who he knew would tempt Eve. He could have just not made a talking snake. Of all the animals that can talk, there's only two in the Bible, the talking serpent and then the talking donkey. And both of which are actually acting against God's best interests. So he's giving these animals the ability to talk and a heightened form of intelligence, even though he knows in advance that the serpent is going to tempt Eve to eat the fruit against his own wishes, and the donkey is going to warn Balaam that he's about to be killed by God.
Right. The funny thing is, at least donkeys have vocal cords. So they can articulate. Snakes don't have vocal cords. So that snake was doing telepathy with Adam and Eve because a snake cannot vocalize language. So I don't know how the fuck it spoke to Eve in the first place.
Well, and as you know, language is really complex, and the only reason we are able to make the sounds with our mouths that we can is because our mouths and tongues are shaped a certain way. If you take a donkey, and even if you could crank its intelligence up to our level, I mean, granted, I'm not a biologist, but I would venture to say the donkey still would not be able to talk unless God made some sort of alterations to its mouth structure to enable it to say the same words that we can.
Magic. It's a miracle. Magic.
Whenever you get Christians, like you said, you need to hold their feet to the fire. You get them in the corner, and then that's what they always fall back on. Oh, it's just magic, or you got to have faith because it all makes sense, and we'll find out when we're dead.
Why are you attacking my beliefs?
Why are you attacking me?
That's crazy. So I just want to be mindful of everybody's time as well. So I am going to jump. Yeah. That's good. No, I just I usually keep our show. I'm very strict about this. I try to keep it to an hour, just because sometimes especially when people watch long streams, it becomes very monotonous and they disengage from it. So I want to keep it short and punchy. I want to move on to the last three questions that we have here, just to I don't want to draw it out for too long. So positive aspects, or areas of personal growth as a result of leaving your religion. In what way have you noticed that your life has changed for the better since leaving your religion?
I think I have a better sense of morality. I mentioned my foundation as well-being earlier, and how I never really even considered that in the past. So that's probably number one. Number two is a better appreciation and understanding of nature. So, we already talked about this. I look around, I find nature very beautiful. I love seeing, landscapes, the night sky. I think it's so much cooler through the lens of not magic. So when you recognize the world for what it really is, I think it adds that much more beauty and inspiration.
Yeah. I will never forget, the first time I met with Dr. Leo Igwe from Nigeria. We had this conversation, and he said this. It'll stick to me until the day that I die. He said the first thing that he recognized was the return of agency. Just to have agency and autonomy, where you are your own person, and he said it was such a profound experience, and it stuck to me because I'll never do justice to the way that he worded it, but it was really a profound thing, and because ultimately that's what religion robs us. It prefers obedient little minions. People who think for themselves are a big threat to religious thinking. And just to discover, I have my own agency. What I do affects my life. It's not, there's not some divine knob twiddler who's planning the universe in a specific way. And if I stump my toe and curse, then the knobs are going to be twiddled for some misfortune coming my way. And just to realize that that sense of agency, it's a very, very profound experience. And I wish that for every human being. I wish for every human being that they can feel in control of their lives, their destinies, and not be some puppet on a string.
Right. Yeah, a big one too is freedom of thought, where and this was the very first week that I deconverted. I finally, for the first time in my whole life, felt like I was by myself in my own head. And all up until that point, I always had this feeling like God was not only watching what I did, but he was also in my head watching everything I thought. And so I felt like I was being judged just for having feelings, just for having thoughts pop into my head like, oh, God's not going to like that I'm thinking about this, so I better stop. And it's like I finally felt free. It's such a relief. It was like the weight was lifted off my shoulders. Like there's no longer this looming threat of these, spy glasses, these binoculars from heaven watching down on every second of every day. It was so freeing to finally be alone and not feel like I was being monitored constantly. And it's interesting how Christians tend to think that constant monitoring is something they like. They're like, oh, isn't it great that God's watching over us? And I'm like, if the government was spying on it, the government set up cameras all over your house and put a chip in your brain where they can monitor your thoughts, you would think this is the worst kind of dystopia I can ever imagine. And they're celebrating it just because it's a magical God. But, I find it gross either way.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. It's I've heard it said before. It's the desire to be a slave. That's what religion is. It's people who literally desire enslavement, because that freedom of thought and freedom of just expression that you talked about now, it's the antithesis of what religion teaches and and wants from us. How do you engage with religious individuals now? We talked about it a little bit earlier. For me personally, I'm a very reasonable person. I'm like you as well. I'm not out there trying to spread the good news that the sky is empty and that when you die you are just going to rot. But if you approach me with religion, and usually my back gets up very quickly about that. But I've mellowed like a fine wine, and I'm not quite as tart and bitter about it as I was in the beginning. Nowadays, if you approach me with a reasonable argument, I'm more than likely going to give you a reasoned response. But don't come to me with Mudman and Rip Woman in the garden with the talking snake and the zoo boat and all of that nonsense, because you are immediately going to feel the ridicule and scorn that those things deserve. How do you engage with religious people now? Do you still have that fire in you?
Yeah. I'm definitely more fiery online than I am in my personal life. But if anyone ever asks me in real life what my beliefs are, if they ask me about God, or if they make some sort of implication about God, I'm always honest with them. So I never pretend like I'm a Christian to appease them. I'll never, submit my opinion and say, oh yeah, I'm sure God, likes this or that, and just go along to get along, unless I'm at work and it's some sort of client. It's not really worth don't really want to get into a theological debate with them. But outside of that setting, if it's just someone knocking on my door or a family member, I'm always happy to engage. In fact, these theological discussions about religion, philosophy, science, it's one of my favorite things to talk about. So I always love when people come up and ask me my thoughts about God and religion. I'm happy to talk about it in a respectful way. And so long as someone's showing me respect, I'm happy to hear their beliefs. And, I find a lot of times with Christians, I end up just asking them lots of questions and just, having them explain their beliefs to me and then posing objections when I see fit. It was only a couple of weeks ago, a proselytizer from some church came knocking on my door telling me about Jesus. And I indulged his conversation until he got bored and wanted to leave on wanted to out. So, I'm going to hold you, you bring it up to me, knocking on my door, I'm going to hold you verbally hostage until you leave. So,
it's true.
And he was going to tell me how, his life got so much better when he found Jesus because he was on drugs, yada, yada, yada. And I told him, well, my life is pretty good now, so I feel like it doesn't really need that much improvement, so why do I need this religion? And he's like, well, what about your eternal life? You're going to get tortured forever in hell. And then I'm like, whoa, you want me to worship a God who's going to torture me forever? That sounds pretty bass backwards. So, the conversation went on, but, I'm always happy to have
it. Yeah, it's true. Stockholm syndrome, that conversation, yes. I always like to point out to them. Stockholm syndrome, and it's masochism, the sadomasochism actually in essence is that thing where you have to love something that you are also deathly afraid of and that you have to fear and revere. It's the very sickest form of relationship that one can have. Sadomasochism. I neglected to ask you about the fallout zone, because you're obviously out with your atheism. What was the reaction like from your religious family members and community? Were there any conflicts? What was the fallout zone like?
Yeah, my experience was probably just about as pleasant as it could have possibly been. My parents are devoutly religious. Most of my family, almost all my family, is very Christian, very religious. But I never felt like they were ostracizing me or belittling me or, mad at me or going to disown me. I had a very pleasant experience. My mom, in particular, is usually very open to conversations like this, and we'll talk about religion and Christianity. for long periods of time. And, of course, we don't see eye to eye on, whether God exists and whether Jesus' sacrifice was good or bad. But she's always willing to have the conversation, albeit sometimes she gets a little sad at my lack of faith, but she's still willing to have the conversation, and she doesn't love me any less because of it. So I'm incredibly grateful to have two really amazing parents that have been and continue to be really supportive despite our differences and how we think the universe came into existence. I've really never had any sort of negative fallout because of a deconversion. And granted, I go out of my way to bring it up to family members. In fact, I think my extended family didn't even find out I was an atheist until years after I left Christianity, because I never bothered to bring it up. And I would even, at family gatherings like Christmas, I would go to church and sit in the pews and just keep my mouth shut. I'm not going to go into a church and start yelling, God's not real. I'm just going to, I'll sit there and I'm not going to sing, and I'll keep my eyes open when everyone plays. But I certainly never felt the need to make some big announcement like, hey, everyone, I'm no longer a Christian. I just let it be what it is. And if people are curious about my thoughts, they're welcome to ask, and I'll be honest with them. But, otherwise, I'm just going to, I'm not going to stir any pots that don't need to be stirred. And not everyone is as lucky as I was, but,
No, I was about to say that, you can count yourself very lucky because, especially in our local community, we have members from certain sects of Christianity where people are completely shunned. They, family won't speak to them. They experience the real impact of that Christian love. It permeates the Christian identity, just how loving and kind and accepting they are. So, but just from my side as well, it's it's sort of like I also, I didn't go out of my way, because my family also, I have this one aunt, she's fucking extremely religious. She's one of those people that will send you those motivational Bible verses on the family WhatsApp group and everything, and if you block the group, then she'll send it to you personally. And, and like sometimes, I had to just put my foot down and say, I understand that this is who you are. I respect it, but things have changed in this situation, and I am the variable in this equation that has changed. So I understand that this is on me. This is not anything on you, but things have changed for me. I don't see things in the same light anymore. I respect our relationship and I value it more than I actually value this particular difference that we have. So for the sake of our relationship, I am prepared to completely ignore that aspect. But you have to understand that I have certain boundaries, which I would like you not to step over, because it is going to adversely affect our relationship going forward. And if you in turn value our relationship, you will respect that boundary. And then I'm not going to cry a river if somebody steps, they're not going to say like praise science, like at the dinner table when they pray or anything like that, So I understand that I'm the person that's changed. If they want to bless their food in case they die from choking and go to heaven or whatever else, I don't care. It doesn't affect me. And I think it also, I found that when I just became an atheist, that I was extremely anti-theist, and I still am to a certain extent. But I think with time, it's mellowed out a whole lot. Like I've become far more lenient and accepting, especially with like close members of my family. They'll never change. It's like trying to take a beloved toy from a child. Like they will cry and kick and scream until you put that toy back in their arms. It's very, very strange how that works. But yeah, I want to be extremely grateful to you for spending your Saturday morning with us.
Sure.
You've been incredibly kind and generous with your time. Tell us, where can people find you on social media if they want to find out what the Spaghetti Monster would do in certain situations?
Sure. And yeah, thanks again for so much for having me on the show. It's been a huge pleasure. I love talking about this kind of stuff. On YouTube, you can find me at Flying Spaghetti Auditor, and the same exact name on Instagram, Flying Spaghetti Auditor. And lately, the algorithm on YouTube, it almost seems like it changed because this year I tried to make an attempt to double down and create more content, which
Yeah.
a much bigger content goal. And I've seen some really good results from it on Instagram and a lot of growth recently, just this year. But YouTube seems like it had the opposite effect. When I started posting more, I started getting fewer views. It's weird, but either place you can find me. I've got longer videos on YouTube where you can watch me ramble on for 10 plus minutes. I've got a couple of hour plus debates on there you can watch. And then Instagram is where you can find some more of my well-organized shorts and reels and bite-sized content. Almost all the bite-sized content's on YouTube as well, but either platform is great.
Do you do TikTok at all?
You know what's funny? I used to do TikTok, and that was what I started with before I even made a YouTube channel or an Instagram page. And my videos kept getting taken down. TikTok would ban my videos for hate speech or nudity or weird things, even though there's no nudity in the video. You still get flagged for weird stuff like that. And then if you get 3 videos taken down, they ban your account. And after 3 accounts getting banned, I finally gave up and decided that TikTok is stupid and not worth it. And then now I can stick with Instagram and YouTube.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah, so again, I want to thank you for being so generous and for meeting with us. It's been a real pleasure. I want to remind our audience, tomorrow at 3 p.m. South African time, we have got our monthly Atheist Hangout on Microsoft Teams. So go into the consulates and you can find the links over there to join. Come and have a chat with us. It's always great fun. And then tomorrow afternoon at 5 p.m. after the meetup we're having, Tasha will be interviewing. Oh my God, what's slipped my mind completely? I set these things up. Yeah. Who the fuck is Tasha interviewing? I don't know. Just check on the channel. You'll find that Tasha's interviewing somebody for us at 5 p.m. and it's going to be a very packed day tomorrow. So yes, remember, if you are an atheist out there, you've got your community here. Find us on Facebook, find us on YouTube, and keep fighting the good fight. We'll catch you guys out there. Stay safe, my friends. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Dean.